Today we're going to explore a fascinating paradox. Why do highly talented, intelligent people often struggle with creative blocks and procrastination? We'll dive into the neuroscience and psychology behind this phenomenon. Let's start with an interesting observation. You might know someone who's incredibly talented, perhaps a brilliant programmer, artist, or writer. Yet somehow, they can't seem to finish their projects. They delay, they overthink, they freeze. Why does this happen? Here's the paradox visualized. On the left, we have high ability, intelligence, skill, talent. On the right, paradoxically low output, unfinished projects, procrastination, creative paralysis. The question is, why doesn't the arrow connect these smoothly? Research shows three main mechanisms at work: fear of failure, perfectionism, and reward prediction errors in the brain. Let's explore each one in depth. Fear of failure is particularly intense in talented individuals. Here's why. When you're known as the smart one, the talented one, every project becomes a test of your identity. Psychologists call this the identity protection hypothesis. Your talent becomes part of your self-concept. Any failure threatens not just the project, but your entire sense of S. When your identity is wrapped up in being talented, any potential failure becomes an existential threat. It's not just, I failed at this task. It becomes, maybe I'm not actually talented. Here's an important question. Why does fear of failure affect talented people more than average performers? Think about it for a moment. The answer lies in what's at stake. Average performers have lower expectations. A failure is just data. But for talented individuals, there's a reputation, an identity, years of validation built on being exceptional. The psychological stakes are much higher. Carol Dweck's research on mindsets is crucial here. She identified two mindsets: fixed and growth. Talented people often develop fixed mindsets. Fixed mindset says, talent is innate, you either have it or you don't. Failure reveals lack of ability. Growth mindset says, ability develops through effort, failure is just learning. Talented people often get trapped in fixed mindset because their early success came easily. Now let's examine perfectionism. This is distinct from fear of failure, though they're related. Perfectionism creates paralysis through impossibly high standards. Talented people often have exceptional taste. They can envision the perfect outcome clearly. But here's the problem. Their vision exceeds their current execution, at least initially. This creates a painful gap. Here's the gap: the perfect vision in their mind versus what they can currently produce. For talented people with refined taste, this gap is agonizing. Rather than tolerate imperfection, they don't start at all. Let's do a quick calculation. Imagine a talented writer who demands perfection. Every paragraph must be flawless before moving forward. How does this affect productivity? A normal writer might produce 1,000 words per day, accepting that first drafts are imperfect. A perfectionist might only produce 200 words per day because they're constantly editing, rewriting, agonizing over each sentence. That's only 20% of normal productivity. Over a year, that's the difference between finishing 5 projects versus 1. For an 80,000-word novel, at 200 words per day, that's 400 days. Over a year of work for something that could take 3 months with a healthier approach. That's 320 days lost to perfectionism. Almost a full year of creative output, sacrificed to impossible standards. Now for the neuroscience. Let's talk about dopamine and reward prediction errors. This is where it gets really fascinating from a brain mechanism perspective. Your brain constantly predicts future rewards. Dopamine neurons fire when reality exceeds prediction. They're silent when reality matches prediction. They decrease firing when reality falls short. This is called reward prediction error. When actual reward exceeds expectation, you get a positive prediction error and dopamine spike. This feels good and motivates action. When actual falls short of expected, you get a negative prediction error and dopamine dip. This feels bad and inhibits action. Here's the problem for talented people. Their expectations are calibrated to their peak performance. Every project is expected to be brilliant, but reality rarely exceeds these sky-high expectations. Let me pose a question. What happens to a talented person's dopamine response as they continue working on creative projects with high expectations? The answer is grim. They experience chronic negative reward prediction errors. Even good work feels disappointing because it doesn't meet their astronomical expectations. The dopamine system stops providing motivation. Let's quantify this. A talented person might expect their work to score 95 out of 100. They won't accept less. But realistically, even good work might score 85 out of 100. This is objectively excellent, but subjectively disappointing. The prediction error is negative 10 points. The brain interprets this as failure, even though 85 is excellent work. This negative signal inhibits future action. Now let's tie this together with a mathematical model. Piers Steel developed the temporal motivation theory, which gives us the procrastination equation. Motivation equals expectancy times value, divided by impulsiveness times delay. Let's break down each component. Expectancy is your belief that you'll succeed. For talented people with fear of failure, this paradoxically decreases over time as stakes increase. Value is how much the outcome matters. For perfectionists, only exceptional outcomes have value, which actually reduces motivation for normal work. Impulsiveness is susceptibility to distraction. Talented people often have high impulsiveness due to diverse interests and low tolerance for discomfort. Delay is how far away the reward is. Creative projects have long delays, which exponentially reduces motivation. Let's plug in realistic numbers for a talented person starting a challenging creative project. Expectancy is only 0.4. They doubt they can meet their own standards. Value is 7 out of 10. Important project, but not existential. Impulsiveness is 6. Many interests, avoidant of discomfort. Delay is 180 days, a 6-month project until completion. Plugging these in, 0.4 times 7, divided by 6 times 180, that gives us 0.0026, essentially zero motivation. Now let's compare this to an average person with healthier expectations and less perfectionism. Expectancy is 0.7. They believe they can do decent work. Value is 5, it matters, but expectations are moderate. Impulsiveness is 4. More focused, same delay of 180 days. Their motivation calculates to 0.0049. That's almost double the talented person's motivation, despite having less ability. Let me give you a powerful analogy. Imagine two people learning to walk a tightrope. One person walks the rope 50 feet above ground with no safety net. That's the talented person. Every step is terrifying because falling means catastrophe. The other person walks the same rope but 3 feet above a safety net. That's the average person. They can risk, stumble, learn. Who learns faster? Paradoxically, the person with the safety net. They can experiment, fail safely, and iterate. The person without the net is paralyzed by fear. Same ability, different outcomes based on perceived consequences. Let me give you a concrete example. Consider two programmers, both talented, working on the same challenging feature. Programmer A is brilliant but perfectionist. She spends 3 days planning the perfect architecture, reads every relevant paper, considers every edge case before writing a line of code, fears releasing anything imperfect. Programmer B is equally talented but embraces iteration, writes a rough working version in 4 hours, tests it, gets feedback, iterates, accepts that version 1 won't be perfect. Programmer A spends 24 hours and produces 0 working code, still in the planning phase. Programmer B spends 6 hours total and has a working feature deployed, gathering real user feedback. After 1 week, Programmer A is still refining the architecture, no code shipped. Programmer B is on version 3, incorporating real user feedback. Feature is improving rapidly based on actual data rather than speculation. Here's a critical question. Despite equal talent, who produces more value over their career? Think about this carefully. The answer is clear. Programmer B produces vastly more value, not because of greater talent, but because of psychological factors. Lower fear of failure, tolerance for imperfection, faster feedback loops, more learning opportunities. Let's go deeper into the neuroscience. What happens in the brain when a talented person tries to start a project but feels paralyzed? The anterior cingulate cortex detects conflict between the desire to start and the fear of failure. This creates an aversive signal. The amygdala amplifies threat perception. For talented people with identity wrapped up in success, the amygdala treats creative failure like physical danger. The prefrontal cortex, needed for executive function and initiating work, gets hijacked by anxiety. Working memory capacity drops. Decision-making becomes impaired. The amygdala signals threat. The anterior cingulate signals conflict. Both overwhelm the prefrontal cortex, which then can't initiate action. The result: paralysis. You want to work, but physically cannot start. Let's do one final calculation to see the cumulative cost of this pattern over a career. Assume someone with healthy psychology has 250 productive days per year, accounting for weekends and breaks. A talented procrastinator, due to creative blocks, might only have 100 truly productive days per year. The rest is paralysis, false starts, avoidance. That's a gap of 150 days per year. That's essentially 5 months of lost productivity annually. Over a 30-year career, that's 4,500 days lost. That's more than 12 years of productive time sacrificed to psychological barriers. 12 years of books unwritten, software unbuilt, art uncreated, not due to lack of talent, but due to fear, perfectionism, and dopamine dysfunction. So how do talented people break this cycle? Research suggests several evidence-based interventions. First, drastically lower the activation energy to start. Don't commit to finishing a novel, commit to writing one bad paragraph. The goal is action, not excellence. Second, separate creation from evaluation temporally. Create on Monday, evaluate on Thursday. Never do both simultaneously. This prevents the internal critic from paralyzing the internal creator. Third, systematically recalibrate expectations. If you expect 95 out of 100, consciously lower the bar to 70. Give yourself permission for good enough first drafts. Fourth, adopt scientist mindset. Scientists don't fear failed experiments, they're data. Reframe creative attempts the same way. Every failure is information guiding you towards success. Fifth, create external accountability structures. Public commitments, accountability partners, scheduled check-ins. External structure compensates when internal motivation fails. Here's a meta question. If the problem is neurological and psychological, does simply understanding these mechanisms actually help? Can knowledge overcome biology? The answer is yes, but indirectly. Understanding these mechanisms gives you metacognitive awareness. You can recognize, I'm experiencing a negative reward prediction error rather than, I'm a failure. This cognitive reframe reduces the emotional intensity and restores some prefrontal control. Let me synthesize everything we've covered. Talent paradoxically creates higher psychological stakes. Every project becomes a referendum on identity. This raises anxiety and lowers motivation. Perfectionism creates impossibly high expectations, leading to chronic negative reward prediction errors that starve the dopamine system of motivation signals. Fear of failure activates amygdala threat circuitry that literally impairs the prefrontal cortex's ability to initiate action. Paralysis is neurological, not just psychological. Breaking the cycle requires systematic intervention, lowering activation energy, separating creation from evaluation, recalibrating expectations, reframing failure, and building external accountability. Here's the final crucial insight. Talent is potential, not destiny. The most productive, impactful people aren't always the most talented. They're the ones who figured out how to consistently ship work, despite imperfection, doubt, and fear. Talent without psychological tools is like a race car without a driver. All that potential just sits there, magnificent but motionless.